here we go again. Our adventures of Dorian Gray, the picture of Dorian Gray. And I'm already feeling a lot better today, guys. Yesterday, I had a lot of congestion, runny nose. I was blowing my nose left and right. Today, I feel a lot better. I'm not needing to blow my nose nearly as much. Last time in Dorian, we were on chapter 3. There was a dinner conversation with Lord Henry and Dorian. Lord Henry is speaking with some other members of his family, I believe. Lady Agatha, Lord Fermor, I believe his name was. Yeah, Lord Fermor, and Lord Erskine, I believe his name is. Sorry, not Lord Erskine, Mr. Erskine. And yeah, they're just kind of talking between themselves, between each other. Did anything particularly stand out in that chapter? Uh-oh, it says my... My laptop isn't charging. Hold on, guys. Okay, is it charging now? Okay, yeah, it's charging now. All it took was a flip of the switch. Okay. Alright, here we go, guys. Here we go. Yeah, Lord Henry's saying he can't sympathize with suffering. The less said about life's sores, the better. Kind of strange for Lord Henry to say that, because I think up until now he's been one of the more cynical characters in the novel. He is the one, after all, who brought it to Mr. Dorian's attention that beauty and youth are both fleeting. Yeah, Sir Thomas. Okay, let's advance in the book to chapter 4. Gotta be careful when I do that, because my drink, goes everywhere. Okay, alright, chapter 4, Dorian. These videos, I'm posting some of them on YouTube for people to reference, to ones that want to follow along with Oscar Wilde's novel and maybe don't have the ability to watch live, can and do so at their leisure through the VODs on Twitch and the videos that are posted on YouTube. Okay, so without further ado, let's dive into chapter 4. One afternoon, a month later, Dorian Gray was reclining in a luxurious armchair, much like I am, although this is more so, I would say, a recliner. But anyway, in the little library of Lord Henry's house in Mayfair, which in and of itself highlights the development of the relationship between Lord Henry and Dorian. Dorian himself has shown an affinity for and a fondness of Lord Henry. So by fast forwarding to Dorian hanging out in Lord Henry's house, we kind of see see them growing closer together. Their relationship is developing. It was, in its way, a very charming room, with its high-paneled wainscoting of olive-stained oak, its cream-colored frieze and ceiling of raised plasterwork, and its brick-dust felt carpet, strewn with silk and long-fringed Persian rugs. On a tiny satin wood table stood a statuette by Claudion, and beside it lay a copy of Les Cent Nouvelle, bound for Margaret of Valois by Clovis Eve, and powdered with the gilt daisies that Queen had selected for her device. It has a footnote here, but it's not clear where the footnote goes. I can just keep reading it. Some large blue china jars and parrot tulips were arranged on the mantel shelf, and through the small leaded panes of the window streamed the apricot-colored light of a summer day in London. Again, Oscar Wilde with very vivid imagery. It's almost as if I could be in that exact same house in Mayfair. And yeah, it seems really nice. Everything seems nice. I guess that somewhat comes with title, right? Title carries with it connotations of privilege. Lord Henry, Lord Fermor. Lord Henry had not yet come in. He was always late on principle. As I was today, to my detriment. His principle being that punctuality is the thief of time. Yeah, I mean, well written, Oscar Wilde. Like, think of all the fun things you could be doing when you're late to anything. The expression is that it said that it's fashionable to show up late. Like he or she showed up fashionably late, and it's like, yeah. So the lad was looking rather sulky as, with listless fingers, he turned over the pages of an elaborately illustrated edition of Manon Lescaut. That is a French novel by Ab Prévost about a woman who forgoes love for luxury. Published in 1731. I wonder how and when that would be the case. I think most women think of love and luxury as the same. They prioritize men with higher paying salaries, higher paying jobs. It's like if you say you're a lawyer or a doctor, then the ladies are just gonna like get with you because you make bank, and earning potential reflects in a way what women desire: protection, stability, and the ability to provide. I think it's somewhat got gobbled up in our time. Back in the days when women stayed at home and men worked, I think it was more clear cut. Nowadays, more women are working, more women are returning to work. Women are asking and commanding salaries that are equivalent to men. And so what we're seeing is what I would describe as a gender reversal going on. But yeah, those are the times. Okay. The formal monotonous ticking of the Louis XIV's clock annoyed him. Once or twice he thought of going away. Louis XIV's is in the ornate style of French King Louis XIV. He reigned from 1643 to 1715. Twice he thought of being right. I wonder if I can play that sound for you all. If I can find it, I will. Let's see. Yeah, it's taken after Louis XIV. He's referred to as the Sun King, it's telling me. Wish I knew more about him. This would have been well in advance of the French Revolution. Is this preceding? Yes, I believe it was also preceding the Napoleonic era. Monotonous ticking of this style clock. I'm just wondering if I can hear what it sounds like. If not, I'll just keep going. It doesn't seem like... It doesn't seem like I can find anything on YouTube about this type of sound. What I imagine is it sounds like a grandfather clock, but like dun dun dun. But I guess that's the closest approximation I can have for this style clock. At last he heard a step outside, and the door opened. "How late you are, Harry," he murmured. I need to kind of try to see a little further ahead, to try to reflect the way that it's said. Sometimes I make the mistake of just reading everything how I think it should be read. But the way it should be said is, yeah, even this is strange, because it's like an exclamation point and then he murmured. Exclamation points in the English language, as we know, connote excitement, enthusiasm, right? And then when it says like he murmured, it's like when you murmur something, it's like, you know, it's like you almost always use a period for something you murmur, or maybe a what's it called, ellipses, the dot dot dot. It's not. Is it ellipses or is it something else? An ellipsis. Yeah, man, I'm smart as heck sometimes, guys. Like dot dot dot, the ellipsis. Usually that carries with it, though, the intended meaning of an omitted word. It's used to reflect omissions, things that are removed. Whereas what I'm thinking more is like you trail off like when I'm thinking murmured, it's like how late you are, Harry. Like when someone murmurs, it's like almost impossible to hear what they're saying because they say it's so low in energy. How late you are, Harry. Versus how it is in the text with the exclamation point. How late you are, Harry. Like the exclamation point would be used more like he said lively. He said so like in a lively fashion. Or with enthusiasm. Okay, but anyway, how late you are, Harry, he murmured. I'm afraid it is not Harry, Mr. Gray, answered a shrill voice. He glanced quickly around and rose to his feet. I beg your pardon, we thought it was my husband. It is only his wife. You must let me introduce myself. I know you quite well by your photographs. I think my husband has got 17 of them. Hopefully it explains more who's speaking here, because I'm a little bit confused. Not 17. Okay, it says not 17, Lady Henry. There we go. So does this imply that is so fascinating? Like, does that imply that Lord Henry's bisexual? It's hard to say because Lord Henry doesn't have. He hasn't, I believe, returned affection. Maybe he has returned affection for Dorian. It's hard to say, like, to what level Lord Henry's relationship is with Dorian. Like it's hard to say what the depths, what kind of relationship that is between Lord Henry and Dorian. Are they just friends? Are they more than friends? It's not clear, but Lord Henry, it's explaining here, is actually married to Lady Henry. Not 17, Lady Henry. Dorian says to Lady Henry about the amount of photographs her husband has taken of him. Well, 18 then. And I saw you with him the other night at the opera. She laughed nervously as she spoke, and watched him with her vague forget-me-not eyes. Forget-me-nots the color of a bright blue flower. So yeah, it must have been pretty remarkable to see. Hello, Board Fox. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Stormer Show. I never forget a fan. And yeah, some of my fans are pretty dang loyal. I haven't seen Adzi or Denominator lately, but I'm sure we can still find them on the internet somewhere. In that void called the internet. Alrighty. Yeah, not 17, well 18. She laughed nervously as she spoke and watched him with her vague forget-me-not eyes. She was a curious woman whose dresses always looked as if they'd been designed in a rage and put on in a tempest. Wow. Like, are her dresses ripped up, or like, what? I assume that's the case. Like, maybe it's showing a lot of skin. I don't really know. She was usually in love with somebody, and as her passion was never returned, she had kept all her illusions. I relate all too well. She tried to look picturesque, but only succeeded in being untidy. Her name was Victoria, and she had a perfect mania for going to church. That was at Lohengrin. That's Richard Wagner's 1848 opera about an Arthurian knight. Contains the famous wedding march. I like Wagner's music better than anybody's. It's so loud that one can talk the whole time without other people hearing what one says. I kind of hate that effect about like movie theaters and some types of like live shows, like concerts. Sometimes like the sound is so loud that you cannot hear other people talk. It's like you have to like shout to beat the volume. It's like, what? I said, do you like this song? What? Like that kind of thing. Yeah, it is so loud that one can talk the whole time without other people hearing what one says. So here, let's see. I believe Dorian's saying this. Oh wait, it must be Lady Henry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Dorian said the previous line, and then Lady Henry saying this line. Yeah, Dorian. Yeah, sorry. Lady Henry is saying she likes it when music makes it so that way people cannot eavesdrop on her conversations. That's basically what I'm gathering from this. Like, it's just loud enough so that way she can talk to whoever she's talking to without other people being able to hear what she's saying. Like, she really likes her A and B conversations. That is a great advantage, don't you think so, Mr. Gray? The same nervous staccato laugh broke from her thin lips, and her fingers began to play with a long tortoiseshell paper knife. Dorian smiled and shook his head. I'm afraid I don't think so, Lady Henry. I never talk during music. At least during good music. If one hears bad music, it's one's duty to drown it in conversation. It's like it's like if you hear something you don't like let's just talk over it the entire time. My cough still hasn't gone away though. Funnily enough. Yeah, I still have some mucus. It is what it is. I'm feeling better though, thankfully. My nose is not running as much. That is one of Harry's views, isn't it, Mr. Gray? I always hear Harry's views from his friends. It's the only way I get to know them. But you must not think I don't like good music. I adore it, but I'm afraid of it. It makes me too romantic. Yeah, sometimes I get the same way. It's like I hear some kinds of songs and I'm just like, love. Spread the love, spread the love. I've simply worshipped pianists, 2 at a time sometimes, Harry tells me. I don't know what it is about them. Perhaps it is that they are foreigners. They all are, aren't they? They all are, ain't they? Even those that are born in England become foreigners after a time, don't they? It kind of reminds me of that song by Death Cab for Cutie, like, when you feel just like a tourist, that's when you know you've got to go. How does the song go? When you feel just like a tourist in a town that you were born in, it's time to go. Something like that. Yeah, I think this sentence is kind of saying something similar. It's like if you spend long enough somewhere, you begin to feel foreign. Like, I want to see somewhere else now. It is so clever of them and such a compliment to art. Makes it quite cosmopolitan, doesn't it? You've never been to any of my parties, have you, Mr. Gray? You must come. I can't afford orchids. But I spare no expense in foreigners. They make one's rooms look so picturesque. But here's Harry. Harry, I came in to look for you, to ask something. I forget what it was, but I found Mr. Gray here. We've had such a pleasant chat about music. We have quite the same ideas. No, I think our ideas are quite different. But he has been the most pleasant. I'm so glad that I've seen him. Yeah. Is this Lady Henry that's saying this? Yeah, I guess Lady Henry is in agreement with Dorian about music, is what she's saying. I'm charmed, my love, quite charmed, said Lord Henry, elevating his dark crescent-shaped eyebrows and looking at them both with an amused smile. So sorry I'm late, Dorian. I went to look after a piece of old brocade in Wardour Street. That's a London street known for its antique shops, and had to bargain for hours for it. Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. It's like the diamond in the rough effect. It's like they can tell you what the TB is worth, but they can't tell you what what anyone is. Like they don't know the real value. Let's see, where was I? Wardour Street. Yeah, nothing. Wilde recycled this sentiment in his 1892 play Lady Windermere's Fan, in which Lord Darlington describes a cynic as a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. It's like, what's the real value? Hold on, Board Fox, I see your text. I don't know if you have this set up. I gotta fix my arm. There we go. Yeah, Board. My stream is. It's like the mom and pop stream. Like, I don't have a lot of bells and whistles on my stream. I think I need to spend more time jazzing up my my setup in my stream. I gotta make it cooler. I gotta add more notifications and stuff like that. Like when people donate, I want like the screen to like light up and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just more of a straightforward stream for now. So hopefully that Board Fox doesn't make it less appealing to you. But yeah, if it does, sorry about that. Hopefully more people come in and watch the stream, and then the chat activity alone will make it a better stream, make it a better show. I could spend more time responding to multiple chatters instead of one chatter, like for example. But it's like, okay, it's like, yeah, I don't really mind responding to one chatter. It's okay. Yeah, I like your attitude, Board Fox. The chill stream. Yeah, and the way I kind of see it right now is it's kind of like Stormer Show is kind of like an exclusive club. Like only certain types of people know about it. It's like you can say you're the elite Storm champion unit. You're a Storm Cloud. Some of their streams may have a bunch of people in them, but they're no Stormer Show, right? Okay. Anyway, let's continue in Dorian, picture of Dorian Gray. I try to keep my computer on because it helps shed light on my face. Let's see, where was I? Yeah, they know the price of everything and the value of nothing. I'm afraid I must be going, exclaimed Lady Henry, breaking an awkward silence with her silly sudden laugh. I had promised to drive with the Duchess. Goodbye, Mr. Gray. Goodbye, Harry. You're dining out, I suppose? So am I. Perhaps I shall see you at Lady Thornberry's. I dare say, my dear, said Lord Henry, shutting the door behind her, as, looking like a bird of paradise that had been out all night in the rain, she flitted about the room, leaving a faint odor of frangipani. Frangipani is a tropical flowery fragrance derived from the jasmine flower and named for a 16th century Italian perfumer, Marquis Muzio Frangipani. Okay. It's hard to say which one came first. I guess the flower came first. It's ironic that it was named after the Italian painter in that case. Yeah, it says it's the tropical flowery fragrance that's named after the Italian perfumer. 16th century. Did he create the scent, or was the scent already did it already exist? Derived from the jasmine flower. Maybe he's the one who created the scent. Yeah, I guess that's the case. I guess he created the scent. Okay, yeah, that's Marquis Muzio Frangipani. I dare say, my dear, said Lord Henry, shutting the door behind her. Yeah. Then he lit a cigarette and flung himself down on the sofa. Never marry a woman with straw-colored hair, Dorian, he said after a few puffs. Why, Harry? Because they're so sentimental. But I like sentimental people. Never marry at all, Dorian. Men marry because they're tired, women because they're curious. Both are disappointed. Yeah, this Lord Henry, he's quite wise. Yeah, he's been around the block a few times, Lord Henry. I don't think I'm likely to marry Harry. I am too much in love. That is one of your aphorisms. I'm putting into practice as I do everything you say. Who are you in love with? Asked Lord Henry after a pause. With an actress, said Dorian Gray, blushing. Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders. That is a rather commonplace debut. You would not say so if you saw her, Harry. Who is she? Her name is Sybil Vane. Never heard of her. No one has. People will someday, however. She's a genius. Not often used to describe models. Or, sorry, not used to describe actresses, I should say. My dear boy, no woman is a genius. Women are a decorative sex. They never have anything to say, but they say it charmingly. Women represent the triumph of matter over mind, just as men represent the triumph of mind over morals. Lord Henry, you were spitting facts in chapter 4, sir. He's blown my mind with his insight. Mind over morals, he says about men. I wonder how it's used in real life. Yeah, Bored Fox. This book, is some pretty heavy stuff. Oscar Wilde. Luckily, it's not it's not like Pride and Prejudice, for example, or something where I would have to spend a lot of time trying to transfer the meaning of that era to a modern sense for the purposes of comprehension. I feel like it's recent enough where I can read it and the meanings are somewhat easy enough to decipher, where it's I can read it and then I can spend a little bit of time just discussing it instead of trying to just plain old understand it. Harry, how can you? My dear Dorian, it's quite true. I am analyzing women at present, so I ought to know. The subject is not so abstruse as I thought it was. I find that ultimately there are only two kinds of women, the plain and the colored. The plain women are very useful. If you want to gain a reputation for respectability, you have merely to take them down to supper. The other women are very charming. They commit one mistake, however. They paint in order to try and look young. Our grandmothers painted in order to try and talk brilliantly. Rouge and esprit used to go together. That's wittiness. That is all over now. As long as women can look 10 years younger than her own daughter, she is perfectly satisfied. As for conversation, there are only 5 women in London worth talking to, and 2 of these can't be admitted into decent society. However, tell me more about your genius. How long have you known her? Harry, your views terrify me. Never mind that. How long have you known her? About 3 weeks. And where did you come across her? I'll tell you, Harry, but you mustn't be unsympathetic about it. After all, it never would have happened if I had not met you. You filled me with a wild desire to know everything about life. For days after I met you, something seemed to throb in my veins. As I lounged in the park, or strolled down Piccadilly, that's fashionable London commercial street, I used to look at everyone who passed me and wonder with a mad curiosity what sort of lives they led. Some of them fascinated me. Others filled me with terror. There was an exquisite poison in the air. There was an exquisite poison in the air. I had a passion for sensations. Yeah, Lord Henry is... Lord Henry's inspiring Dorian in a somewhat similar way to the way Dorian inspired Basil. Basil was more artistically inclined as a result of seeing Dorian, kind of like the muse, and Lord Henry sparked curiosity in Dorian. He became more curious about the people he met. One evening about 7 o'clock, I determined to go out in search of some adventure. I felt that this grave, monstrous London of ours, with its myriads of people, its sordid sinners, and its splendid sins, as you once phrased, must have something in store for me. I fancied 1,000 things. The mere danger gave me a sense of delight. I remember what you had said to me on that wonderful evening when we first dined together, about the search for beauty being the real secret of life. I don't know what I expected, but I went out and wandered eastward, soon losing my way in a labyrinth of grimy streets and black, grassless squares. About 8:30, I passed by an absurd little theater with great flaring gas jets and gaudy playbills. A hideous Jew in the most amazing waistcoat I ever beheld in my life was standing at the entrance, smoking a vile cigar. He had greasy ringlets and an enormous diamond blazed in the center of a soiled shirt. "Have a box, my lord?" he said when he saw me, and he took off his hat with an act of gorgeous servility. There was something about him, Harry, that amused me. He was such a monster. You laugh at me, I know, but I really went in and paid a whole guinea for the stage box. A guinea is a gold equivalent to 21 shillings. A pound equals 20 shillings. To the present day, I can't make out why I did so, and yet if I hadn't, my dear Harry, if I hadn't, I would have missed the greatest romance of my life. I see you're laughing. It's horrid of you. I'm not laughing, Dorian. At least I'm not laughing at you. But you should not say the greatest romance of your life. You should say the first romance of your life. You will always be loved. And you will always be in love with love. Like, Lord Henry just has a way with words. Really. You are love incarnate, Dorian. A grand passion is the privilege of people who have nothing to do. That is the one use of the idle classes of a country. Don't be afraid. There are exquisite things in store for you. This is merely the beginning. And now he's starting to sound like my mom. Like, it can't end here. You don't know what's around the corner. Do you think my nature is so shallow? Cried Dorian Gray angrily. No, I think your nature is so deep. How do you mean? My dear boy, the people who love only once in their lives are really the shallow people. To all the people who married young and stayed married, ouch. What they call their loyalty and their fidelity. I call it either the lethargy of custom or their lack of imagination. It's somewhat of a condemnation of monogamy, too. He's like, why the heck would you only love one person? Lack of imagination, he says, wow. Pretty scathing assessment, I would say, monogamy by Lord Henry. Faithfulness is to the emotional life what consistency is to the life of the intellect. Simply a confession of failure. Faithfulness. I must analyze it someday. The passion for property is in it. There are many things that we would throw away if we were not afraid that others might pick it up. Yeah, personally think this is the motivation for monogamy. It's like people get married because they don't want anyone else having what they have. They don't like sharing. Um, yeah, holding on to something they can have. But I don't want to interrupt you. Go on with your story. Well, I found myself seated in a horrid little private box with the vulgar drop scene staring me in the face. I looked out from behind the curtain and surveyed the house. It was a tawdry affair, all cupids and cornucopias, like a third-rate wedding cake. The gallery and pit were fairly full, but the 2 rows of dingy stalls were quite empty, and there was hardly a person in what I suppose they called the dress circle. Women went about with oranges and ginger beer, and there was a terrible consumption of nuts going on. Like everyone was eating nuts. It must have been just like the palmy days of the British drama. Just like I should fancy, and very depressing. I began to wonder what on earth I should do when I caught sight of the playbill. What do you think the play was, Harry? I should think The Idiot Boy or Dumb but Innocent. Our fathers used to like that sort of piece, I believe. The longer I live, Dorian, the more keenly I feel that whatever was good enough for our fathers is not good enough for us. In art, as in politics. Le grand-père altagers tort. Okay, hold on, guys. That's grandfathers are always wrong in French. This play was good enough for us, Harry. It was Romeo and Juliet. I must admit that I was rather annoyed at the idea of seeing Shakespeare done in such a wretched hole of a place. Still, I felt interested in a sort of way. At any rate, I determined to wait for the first act. There was a dreadful orchestra presided over by a young Hebrew who sat at a cracked piano that nearly drove me away. At last the drop scene was drawn up, and the play began. Romeo was a stout elderly gentleman with corked eyebrows. Corked are blackened with burnt cork in an exaggerated fashion. A husky tragedy voice and a figure like a beet barrel. Mercutio. In Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet, Mercutio is Romeo's friend and is killed by Juliet's cousin. Mercutio. You were killed by Juliet's cousin. Mercutio was almost as bad. He was played by the low comedian who had introduced gags of his own, was on most friendly terms with the pit. They were both as grotesque as the scenery, and that looked as if it had come out of a country beat. But Juliet, Harry, imagine a girl hardly 17 years of age with a little flower-like face, a small Greek head, plaited coils of dark brown hair, eyes that were violet wells of passion, lips that were like the petals of a rose. She was the loveliest thing I'd ever seen in my life. He said to me once that pathos left you unmoved, but that beauty, mere beauty, could fill your eyes with tears. I'm moved by the beauty of someone or something. I tell you, Harry, I could hardly see this girl for the mist of tears that came across me. And her voice. I never heard such a voice. It was very low at first, with deep mellow notes that seemed to fall singly upon one's ear. Then it became a little louder, and sounded like a flute or a distant hautboy. Oboe. Yeah, oboe. I think this same phenomenon is why like beautiful pop singers and to some extent e-girls are able to rapidly build a giant audience. Like they're able to quickly and easily build in popularity because people see their beauty and they're like, whoa. TikTok is the same way. It's like there's a young beautiful woman and there's like you can see they have like thousands or millions of followers for this exact same phenomenon that Oscar Wilde is describing. Dorian Gray's fascination with this young woman. In the garden scene, it had all tremulous ecstasy that one hears just before dawn when nightingales are singing. There were moments later on when it had the wild passion of violins. You know how a voice can stir one. Your voice and the voice of Sybil Vane are two things that I shall never forget. When I close my eyes, I hear them, and each of them says something different. I don't know which to follow. Why should I not love her, Harry? I do love her. She's everything to me in life. Night after night, I go to see her play. One evening she is Rosalind, and the next evening she is Imogen. I have seen her die in the gloom of an Italian tomb, sucking the poison from her lover's lips. I watched her wandering through the forest of Arden, disguised as a pretty boy in hose and doublet and dainty cap. She has been mad, and has come into the presence of a guilty king, and given him root to wear, and bitter herbs to taste of. She has been innocent, and the black cans of jealousy have crushed her reed-like throat. I've seen her in every age and in every costume. Ordinary women never appear to one's imagination. They are limited to their century. No glamour ever transfigures them. One knows their minds as easily as one knows their bonnets. One can always find them. There's no mystery in any of them. They ride in the park in the morning and chatter at tea parties in the afternoon. They have their stereotyped smile and their fashionable manner. They are quite obvious, but an actress? How different an actress is, Harry? Why didn't you tell me that the only thing worth loving is an actress? And yeah, those are the hardest girls to get with, in my opinion, because they've got more options than, yeah, they got options out the yin yang. It's like they've got dozens of boys to choose from because everyone likes hearing them sing, everyone likes seeing them. It's like you're competing with throngs of men who are trying their best to stand out. Like Taylor Swift is probably this way at some point in time, where it's like she can literally have any boy she wants. She just goes like insane with the possibilities. Like yeah, I can have any boy I want. I'm just gonna make a bunch of breakup songs because I can. Yeah, Bored Fox, don't worry about it. It is a stream after all. Yeah, and the whole Taylor Swift thing was my own aside. It's like, picture the most beautiful, the most talented singers, streamers, video makers. And that's what Sybil Vane is like. Except she was an actress. She was an actress back then. I guess kind of like actors nowadays, which it's like things haven't really changed. Excuse me. A lot is based on like looks still. Like how people look determines what roles they get offered, and on and on and on. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, Bored Fox. Like yeah, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, it's like, look at the pretty light, but it's a person, and they're you know, beautiful. If it's a woman, like young girl, like physically attractive young girl, it's like people just flock. They just flock, yo. And with guys, I think it's true in like acting, like movie actors. I think yeah, it's also true with singers, entertainers, men with like particular talent. Like John Legend was probably that way. John Mayer. Um, I mean, yeah, maybe even Justin Bieber. It's kind of weird in a way, though. It's like, uh, it's kind of like that like phenomenon board Fox, where it's like, once other people catch on to something, it's like, look over there. It's it's like, it's like Justin Bieber puts out a song, for example, and then it's like two, three people think it's great, and then all of a sudden, other people think it's great, and then people are saying how great it is, and there's like this whole like popularity zone. It's created. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's like everyone's saying how great it is, and it's like yeah, it's like a whole zone. All right, let's see. Petals of a rose. But baby. Hmm. Read like throat. I have seen her in every age and in every costume. Yeah, so yeah, Dorian's getting feelings for Sybil. He's seen a lot of her plays. Ordinary women never appear to one's imagination. They're limited to their century. No glamour ever transfigures them. One knows their minds as easily as one knows their bonnets. One can always find them. There's no mystery in any of them. They ride in the park in the morning and chatter at tea parties in the afternoon. They have their stereotyped smile and their fashionable manner. They're quite obvious. But an actress? How different an actress is. Harry, why did you tell me that the only thing worth loving is an actress? Sorry if I already read that. That sounds familiar. I think I may have. But if I'm rereading it, yeah. Because I've loved so many of them, Dorian. Dang, Lord Henry. Player. Oh yes, horrid people with dyed hair and painted faces. Don't run down dyed hair and painted faces. There is an extraordinary charm in them sometimes, said Lord Henry. Wish now that I had not told you about Sybil Vane. I wonder why. Is he afraid that Lord Henry's going to try to get with her? I don't know. Let's see. You could have not helped telling me, Dorian. All through your life you will tell me everything you do. Yes, Harry, I believe that's true. I cannot help telling you things. You have a curious influence over me. If I ever did a crime, I would come and confess it to you. You would understand me. So, we know at this point Lord Henry has become somewhat of a confidant for Dorian. People like you and willful sunbeams of life don't commit crimes. They don't commit crimes, Dorian. But I am much obliged for the compliment all the same. Now tell me. So he's complimenting Dorian in return. And now tell me, reach me the matches like a good boy. Thanks. What are your actual relations with Sybil Vane? So yeah, it's the big question. Is like what is she actually to you? Like what does she actually know? Is it the case where you keep showing up at all of her shows and she doesn't know you exist, or have you guys actually talked to each other? Dorian Gray leaped to his feet with flushed cheeks and burning eyes. Harry, Sybil Vane is sacred. It is only sacred things that are worth touching. Dorian, said Lord Henry with a strange touch of pathos in his voice. But why should you be annoyed? I suppose she will belong to you someday. When one is in love, one always begins by deceiving oneself, and one always ends by deceiving others. That is what the world calls romance. You know her at any rate, I suppose? Of course I know her. On the first night I was at the theater, the horrid old Jew came around to the box after the performance was over and offered to take me behind the scenes and introduce me to her. Yeah. In these post-Holocaust days, I think that some of this vernacular may be considered anti-Semitic in nature, and like those disclaimers that Disney's putting on some of its shows, like some of the ideas, opinions, and views presented in this, in this media is outdated in nature. It's like they have to apologize for the lack of political correctness. I feel like that's how this is. He offered to take him behind the scenes and introduce him. I was furious with him and told him that Juliet had been dead for hundreds of years and that her body was laying in a marble tomb in Verona. The alleged tomb of Juliet from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is a tourist attraction in Verona, Italy. I think from his blank look of amazement that he was under the impression that I had taken too much champagne or something. Well, if you say something like that, he's probably going to think that. He's probably going to think you had been drinking if he's like, hey, I can give you the chance to meet her, and he replies, don't you know that the person she's been playing has been dead for hundreds of years? It's like you think that, what's a good comparison? Like, you think that Jim Carrey is actually, I guess Joel Barish could be one example. Who was, I'm having a hard time remembering. It's like, the comedian Jim Carrey played. Why am I forgetting? It's like Jim and Andy. Yeah, The Great Beyond. Andy Kaufman, right? Andy Kaufman. It's like thinking of Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman, I think is like maybe a good comparison to make. It's like yeah, I'm still not 100%. I'm still sick, guys. Yeah, it is what it is. It's like think. It's like someone's like, hey, you can meet Jim Carrey behind the stage. I'll set it up for you. And you reply, but Andy Kaufman's already been dead. It like seems kind of normal that like someone would reply with like, have you been drinking? Like Andy Kaufman, right? Yeah, Man on the Moon is the name of the film. Yeah. So, yeah, you can't be like that. I assume in today's standards. Aladdin board Fox. I'm not sure whether you're referring to the still stuffy, but it's not as bad as it was yesterday. I'm still wondering whether you're referring to Board Fox, the cartoon or the live action version of Aladdin. Outdated. And maybe some of the representations, maybe. The question is, like, what time period is Aladdin based in? Because that could have something to do with what you're describing, Board Fox. Like, I don't think it's based in our time. Yeah, it's like, I know Aladdin's based on, like, the Alibaba and the 40 Thieves kind of stories. Like, I think it's based on that. Time period, like, I'm looking for time periods. Yeah, it's one of the yeah, it's the Arabian Nights. Sorry, the Arabian Nights. Before, yeah, someone's saying before the Middle Ages is the 1001 Arabian Nights. So yeah, it's technically it's from a completely different time period. So yeah, that makes sense. Board Fox. Sultan, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like Middle Eastern times. The setting of the movie is Agrabah. Yeah. The reason why that seems outdated, Board Fox, is I think because it's trying to loosely base it on a time that, yeah, it's on the previous time. It's like a lot of Disney properties are based on fables in folklore, like stories that have been passed on from generation to generation. Like Sleeping Beauty was one of those. Pocahontas even. And yeah, Mulan. It's like all those stories are characters in folklore that have literally just been passed on from like generation to generation, and then Disney turned it into a script and made a movie out of it. Okay, but anyway, more about Dorian trying to meet Sybil. I think from his blank look of amazement that he was under the impression that I had taken too much champagne. I'm not surprised. Yeah, I'm not either. Then he asked me if I wrote for any of the newspapers. I told him I never even read them. He seemed terribly disappointed at that and confided to me that all the dramatic critics were in a conspiracy against him, and that they were every one of them to be bought. He asked me if I wrote any of the papers. I should not wonder if he was quite right there, but on the other hand, judging from their appearance, most of them cannot be at all expensive. Well, he seemed to think that they were beyond his means, laughed Dorian. By this time, however, the lights were being put out in the theater, and I had to go. He wanted me to try some cigars that he strongly recommended. I declined. The next night, of course, I arrived at the place again. When he saw me, he made me a low bow and assured me that I was a magnificent patron of art. He was a most offensive brute, though he had an extraordinary passion for Shakespeare. Wow. Like the bouncer who loved Shakespeare. He told me once with an air of pride that his 5 bankruptcies were entirely due to the bard, and he insisted on calling him. He seemed to think it a distinction. It was a distinction, my dear Dorian, a great distinction. Most people have become bankrupt through having invested too heavily in the pros of life. To have ruined oneself over poetries and honor. But when did you first speak to Miss Sybil Vane? The third night. She'd been playing Rosalind. I could not help going round. I had thrown her some flowers, and she looked at me, at least I fancied that she had. The old Jew was persistent. He seemed determined to take me behind, so I consented. It was curious my not wanting to know her, wasn't it? No, I don't think so. My dear Harry, why? I'll tell you some other time. I want to know about the girl. Sybil? Oh, she was so shy and so gentle. There is something of a child about her. Her eyes opened wide in exquisite wonder when I told her what I thought of her performance. And she seemed quite unconscious of her power. I think we were both rather nervous. The old Jew stood grinning at the doorway of the dusty green room, making elaborate speeches about us both, while we stood looking at each other like children. He would insist on calling me my lord, so I had to assure Sybil that I was not anything of the kind. And that's one of those like weird things where it's like a way of speaking. It's like governor. it's like that's kind of like how they just refer to people over there. It's like, okay, governor, but you're not actually a governor. It's like, but really, I'm not actually a governor. I think it's like the same way. She said quite simply to me, "You look more like a prince. I must call you Prince Charming." Woo! That is how you spit game, my lady. Although it is Dorian she's addressing, so it kind of makes sense. We know from the text that he is somewhat good looking. At least somewhat good looking. He's youthful. He's attractive. Upon my word, Dorian, Miss Sybil knows how to pay compliments. I'd say so. That was smooth. Smooth as heck. It's like that's like the lady version of a pickup line back then. It's like, dang. She got game. You don't understand her, Harry. She regarded me merely as a person in a play. She knows nothing of life. She lives with her mother, a faded, tired woman who played Lady Capulet. That's Juliet's mother in Romeo and Juliet, in a sort of magenta dressing wrapper on the first night, and looks as if she had seen better days. I know that look. It depresses me, murmured Lord Henry, examining his rings. The Jew wanted to tell me her story, but I said it did not interest me. You were right, and you were quite right. There's always something infinitely mean about other people's tragedies. Sybil's the only thing I care about. What is it to me where she came from? From her little head to her little feet, she's absolutely and entirely divine. Every night of my life, I go to see her act, and every night she's more marvelous. That's the reason, I suppose, that you never dine with me now. I thought you must have some curious romance on hand. You have, but it's not quite what I expected. My dear Harry, we either lunch or sup together every day, and I have been to the opera with you several times, said Dorian, opening his blue eyes in wonder. You always come dreadfully late. Well, I can't help going to see Sybil play, he cried, even if it's only a single act. I get hungry for her presence, and when I think of the wonderful soul that is hidden away in that little ivory body, I'm filled with awe. You can dine with me tonight, Dorian, can't you? He shook his head. Tonight she is Imogen, he answered, and tomorrow night she'll be Juliet. When is she Sybil Vane? Never. I always thought that was so interesting too. It's like, do actors ever lose? Like, I know it is the case with like method acting. Like Man on the Moon is a good example where it's like Jim Carrey. Like he became the character. He invested so much of himself into that role that people were saying he acted rude and obnoxious like that on the set. Like he basically like became Andy Kaufman like on the set, like in his life outside of the show. And I think that's so interesting in a way. It's like people become actors to forget parts of themselves, to remove parts of themselves. It's like they're acting in a way to escape from their real identity. And I guess that's kind of like the fun thing about acting, right? Like that's like if you ask any actor, like, what's the funnest thing about acting? They'd probably tell you all the same things. Like, I get to pretend to be something, I can pretend to be something else. I can pretend to be someone else. I don't need to be myself when I'm acting. Like, and that's what Dorian's saying about Sybil Vane. It's like she can be any of these roles, and when she's not she's not herself. Poor Fox. They're simping for Sybil Vane. Yeah, I think you're right. They seem like it, right? Like the British 19th century version of Sims. But yeah, it's like act. I don't know. I just think that's so interesting about acting. It's like you can be someone else, and I don't know. I think like other people would say and claim that every actor reveals parts of themselves in each and every role they play. And I think that's more obvious for bad actors, like Adam Sandler is I guess one I can think of, where it's like all of his roles somewhat seem the same. All of his roles seem like who he is. Like the funny comedian, the guy who kind of has a rank sense of humor, like like the best actors I think are more like maybe Matthew McConaughey would be a good one, where it's like they can play like a variety of roles. Tom Hanks maybe, they can play like a variety of roles, and it's like, yeah, some of those roles have elements that are reflections that seem like the people that they are versus the people they're portraying, but the people they're portraying, yeah, give them a chance to step outside of who they are. It's like I'm I'm not Tom Hanks. I am, I can't ever remember the name of some Tom Hanks characters. It's like he wasn't Private Ryan in Saving Private Ryan. He was the captain, right? But like you know what I mean, right? Ward Fox is like he's like I'm not Matthew McConaughey. I'm I can never remember my brain. I'm not Matthew McConaughey. I'm Mud. Like that's one example. It's like they can be someone else. All right, let me move on. I think you guys get what I'm talking about. Yeah. Ward Fox. You know what I'm talking about. Like it seems like there's not really a lot of variety there. Okay. Oh, he plays a lot of comedy type roles. The guy sometimes he's the guy who doesn't fit in, like the odd man out kind of thing. I guess another good example would be like Tom Hanks' Forrest Gump. It's like he's like I'm not Tom Hanks. I'm Forrest Gump. And then he can pretend to be that role, and it's like he can be someone else. He doesn't need to be himself in that role. And it's kind of interesting because like the conventional advice that we give people is like always like, oh, just be yourself. Just be yourself.
But that's like the worst advice you can give to an actor, right? It's like the best advice for an actor would be like, just be who this role is. It's almost like in a way, it's like just be anyone else. Just do not be yourself. Be this role instead. Throw yourself into the role. Okay. How horrid you are. She's all the great heroines of the world in one. She is more than an individual. You laugh, but I tell you, she has genius. I love her, and I must make her love me. You, who know all the secrets of life, tell me how to charm Sylvain to love me. I want to make Romeo jealous. I want the dead lovers of the world to hear our laughter and grow sad. Dang, Dorian, this is intense. I want a breath of our passion to stir their dust into consciousness, to wake their ashes into pain. My God, Harry, how I worship her. He was walking up and down the room as he spoke. Hectic spots of red burned on his cheeks. He was terribly excited. I mean, yeah. After that monologue, dang. Yeah, it's like dang. Lord Henry watched him with a subtle sense of pleasure. How different he was now from the shy, frightened boy he'd met in Basil Hallward's studio. His nature had developed like a flower, had borne blossoms of scarlet flame. Out of its secret hiding place had crept his soul, and desire had come to meet it on the way. And what do you propose to do? Said Lord Henry at last. I want you and Basil to come with me some night and see her act. I have not the slightest fear of the result. You are certain to acknowledge her genius. Then we must get her out of the Jew's hands. She is bound to him for 3 years at least, for 2 years and 8 months from the present time. I shall have to pay him something, of course. When all that's settled, I shall take a West End theater. That's the London equivalent of a Broad End theater, and bring her out properly. She'll make the world as mad as she has made me. That would be impossible, my dear boy. Yes, she will. She's not merely art, consummate art instinct in her, but she has personality also, and you've often told me that it is personalities, not principles, that move the age. Well, what night shall we go? Let me see. Today's Tuesday. Let us fix tomorrow. She plays Juliet tomorrow. All right. Let's see. We've only got a couple more pages. All right. The Bristol at 8 o'clock, and I will get Basil. Not 8, Harry. Please. 6:30. We must be there before the curtain rises. You must see her in the first act where she meets Romeo. 6:30? What an hour! It'll be like having a meat tea. High tea at which meat and other substantial fare are served to constitute an early evening meal. Or reading an English novel. It must be 7. No gentleman dines before 7. Shall you see Basil between this and then, or shall I write to him? Dear Basil, I have not laid eyes on him for a week. It is rather horrid of me, as he has sent me my portrait in the most wonderful frame, specially designed by himself, and though I am a little jealous of the picture for being a whole month younger than I am, I must admit that I delight in it. Perhaps you'd better write to him. I don't want to see him alone. He says things that annoy me. He gives me good advice. Lord Henry smiled. People are very fond of giving away what they need most themselves. Yeah, Lord Henry just has a way with words, straight up. It is what I call the depth of generosity. I wonder if Lord Henry can give an example of that, though. Like maybe loneliness. Lonely people give out affection. Oh, Basil's the best of fellows, but he seems to me just a bit of a Philistine. Since I've known you, Harry, I have discovered that. Basil, my dear boy, puts everything that is charming in him into his work. The consequence is that he has nothing left for life but his prejudices, his principles, and his common sense. The only artists that I've ever known who are personally delightful are bad artists. Good artists exist simply in what they make, and consequently are perfectly uninteresting in what they are. A great poet, a really great poet, is the most unpoetical of all creatures. But inferior poets are absolutely fascinating. The worse their rhymes are, the more picturesque they look. And the mere fact of having published a book of second-rate sonnets makes a man quite irresistible. He lives the poetry that he cannot write. The others write the poetry that they dare not realize. I wonder, is that really so, Harry? Said Dorian Gray, putting some perfume on his handkerchief out of a large gold-topped bottle that stood on the table. It must be if you say it, and now I'm off. Imogen is waiting for me. Don't forget about tomorrow. Goodbye. As he left the room, Lord Henry's heavy eyelids drooped, and he began to think. Certainly very few people had interested him so much as Dorian Gray, and yet the lad's mad adoration of someone else caused him not the slightest pang of annoyance or jealousy. He was pleased by it. It made him a more interesting study. He had always been enthralled by the methods of natural science, but the ordinary subject matter of that science had seemed to him trivial and of no import. And so he began by vivisecting himself, and he had ended by vivisecting others. Human life that appeared to him the one thing worth investigating. Compared to it, there was nothing else of any value. It was true that as one watched life in its curious crucible of pain and pleasure, one could not wear over one's face mask of glass, nor keep the sulphurous fumes from troubling the brain and making the imagination turbid with monstrous fancies and misshapen dreams. There were poisons so subtle that to know their properties one had to sicken of them. There were maladies so strange that one had to pass through them if one sought to understand their nature, and yet what a great reward one received. How wonderful the whole world became to one, to note the curious hard logic of passion and the emotional color life of the intellect, to observe where they met and where they separated, at what point they were in unison, and at what point they were at discord. There is a delight in that. What matter what the cost was? One could never pay too high a price for any sensation. It's like some things you just can't put a price on. It's like the feeling of like going down a water slide, I guess, is like one of those things. It's like sometimes those things are just worth way more than the price of admission, because it's like it's the value of that experience. Some experiences don't have values that are easy to describe. He was conscious, and the thought brought a gleam of pleasure into his brown agate eyes, that it was through certain words of his, musical words said with musical utterance, that Dorian Gray's soul had turned to his white girl and bowed in worship before her. To a large extent, the lad was his own creation. He had made him premature. That was something. Ordinary people waited till life disclosed to them its secrets. But to the few, to the elect, the mysteries of life were revealed. For the veil was drawn away. Sometimes this was the effect of art, and chiefly the art of literature, which dealt immediately with the passions and the intellect. But now and then a complex personality took the place and assumed the office of art was indeed in its way a real work of arts, life having its elaborate masterpieces just as poetry has, or sculpture, a painting, or painting. Yes, the lad was premature. He was gathering his harvest while it was yet spring. The pulse and passion of youth were in him, but he was becoming self-conscious. It was delightful to watch him. With his beautiful face and his beautiful soul, he was a thing to wonder at. It was no wonder how it all ended or was destined to end. He was like one of those gracious figures in a pageant or a play, whose joy seemed to be remote from one, but whose sorrows stir one's sense of beauty, and whose wounds are like red roses. Christ's wounds were traditionally described as such. Soul and body, body and soul, how mysterious they were. There was animalism in the soul, and the body had its moments of spirituality. The senses could refine, and the intellect could degrade. Who could say where the fleshly impulse ceased, or the psychical impulse began? How shallow were the arbitrary definitions of ordinary psychologists? And yet, how difficult to decide between the claims of the various schools. Was the soul a shadow seated in the house of sin? Or was the body really in the soul, as Giordano Bruno thought? Separation of spirit from matter was a mystery, and the union of spirit with matter was a mystery also. He began to wonder whether he can make psychology so absolute a science that each little spring of life would be revealed to us. As it was, we always misunderstood ourselves and rarely understood others. Experience was of no ethical value. It was merely the name men give to their mistakes. Another favorite sentiment of Wilde, which is echoed in, among other works, Lady Windermere's Fan. What is it? Experience was of no ethical value. It was merely the name men give to their mistakes. Like, you learn from your mistakes. That's the price of experience. Moralists had, as a rule, regarded it as a mode of warning, had claimed for it a certain ethical efficacy in the formation of character, had praised it as something that taught us what to follow and showed us what to avoid. But there was no motive, power, and experience. It was as little of an active, it was little of an active cause as conscious itself. All that it really demonstrated was that our future would be the same as our past, and that the sin we had done once, and with loathing we would do many times, and with joy. It was clear to him that the experimental method was the only method by which one could arrive at any scientific analysis of the passions, and certainly Dorian Gray was a subject made to his hand, and seemed to promise rich and fruitful results. His sudden mad love for Sybil Vane was a psychological phenomenon of no small interest. There was no doubt that curiosity had much to do with it, curiosity and the desire for new experiences, yet it was not a simple but rather a very complex passion. But there wasn't it of the purely sensuous instinct of boyhood had been transformed by the workings of the imagination and changed into something that seemed to the lad himself to be remote from sense. It was for that very reason all the more dangerous. It was the passions about whose origin we deceived ourselves that tyrannized most strongly over us. Our weakest memories were those of whose nature we were conscious. It often happened that when we thought we were experimenting on others, we were really experimenting on ourselves. While Lord Henry sat dreaming on these things, a knock came to the door, and his valet entered and reminded him it was time to dress for dinner. He got up and looked out into the street. The sunset had smitten into scarlet gold the upper windows of the houses opposite. The panes glowed like plates heated metal. The sky above was like a faded rose. He thought of his friend's young fiery-colored life and wondered how it was all going to end. When he arrived home about 12:30, he saw a telegram lying on a hall table. He opened it and found it was from Dorian Gray. It was to tell him that he was engaged to be married to Sybil Vane. Wow, that went fast. Yeah, that's the end of the chapter. So, yeah, chapter 4. Much focus, guys, on Dorian's relationship with Sybil Vane. So I think it's interesting how, like, each chapter kind of highlights each significant relationship development. I think it's a little bit more murky in chapter 3, but, like, chapter 1 was Basil and Dorian. Chapter 2 was Dorian and Lord Henry. Chapter 3 was, I think, more Lord Henry's family and Dorian. And then, like, chapter 4 is Dorian and Sybil Vane. So yeah, interesting studies. I'm of the belief that Basil's affection for Dorian was probably the most intense we've seen in the novel thus far. Like, reading about Dorian's feelings for Sybil Vane somewhat echoes that passion and that, like, creativity, but it's like yeah, Basil for Dorian, like, Basil cared so much about Dorian that it sparked his creativity and his creative drive. It drove him to create.
So yeah, it's interesting to see if that will happen between Sybil and Dorian. I don't think it will be the case. I think they may be making beautiful babies. I think is gonna be Dorian's focus with Sybil Vane, but you'll have to wait and see. Alright, Boar Fox. Signing out here myself. Stormer Show. Hope you all enjoyed. Chapter. Until next time.